Good morning, 8th graders. This morning we're going to do a little bit of a review for the Chapter 28 test, which is coming up immediately. So I would pay attention if I were you. I brought my coffee, just so you feel at home, because I always had coffee with you guys. Okay, so the question is, what was the Cold War? And the answer is the conflict of ideas and buildup of military strength between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Okay, so that was the Cold War. The United States tried to dominate the Soviet Union by building up military power. Okay, we built up a lot of military power during that time, and it was also nuclear as well. Another way the United States tried to dominate the Soviet Union was by setting a goal to win the space race by landing on the moon. Right? That was pretty cool. That was like the most amazing thing that I ever saw in my entire life. That was so exciting. I was 10 years old when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. Very, very cool stuff. Okay. In what two places did the U.S. refuse to give in to the Soviet Union? And the answer is Cuba and West Berlin. Cuba and West Berlin. Okay. A little bit of a lag, I think. Okay, who was president during the U.S. Cuban Missile Crisis? The answer is John Kennedy. He was the president. Détente. We didn't really talk about détente, but what détente was, it was an easing of tension between the United States and the Soviet Union. Détente was an easing of tension between the Soviet Union and the United States. Who was Fidel Castro? He was the dictator of Cuba. Okay. And the Bay of Pigs was Cuban exiles attempted to invade Cuba, but failed because Castro knew they were coming. Okay. Okay. Sorry, it's allergy season. Man, everything's blooming right now. My eyes are itching. Everything's terrible. What was the Berlin Wall? Okay, the wall was put up by the Soviet Union in Berlin to keep East Berliners from escaping to West Berlin. Okay. What was the Cuban Missile Crisis? It was the crisis when the Soviet Union put nuclear weapons in Cuba, and we didn't like that. Nope. So Kennedy confronted them. What was Kennedy's first response to the Cuban Missile Crisis? And the answer was a blockade. He blockaded Cuba to prevent the missiles from getting there. Okay. And to end the Cuban Missile Crisis, what we did was we accommodated the Soviet Union. They accommodated us. They withdrew the missiles from Cuba. We withdrew the missiles from Turkey, the country of Turkey. We had nuclear missiles there. We accommodated the Soviet Union by selling them wheat. We sold them wheat for their food. Okay. The overall effect of the Cold War during the Kennedy administration was an increase in military spending and an increase of confrontations with the Soviet Union. Okay. So there was an increase in spending and an increase in conflicts with the Russians. President Kennedy was assassinated November 22nd, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. Okay, Dallas, Texas was where he was killed. Lyndon Johnson became the president after Kennedy. Lyndon Johnson. He was the president after Kennedy. The problem that led to the U.S. entry into the Vietnam War was the United States government believed that communist expansion into Vietnam, throughout Vietnam, had to be stopped. We had to stop the communist expansion into Vietnam. Okay, the Viet Cong were South Vietnamese supporters of Ho Chi Minh. They were South Vietnamese communists who supported Ho Chi Minh. Excuse me. Okay. And 3 things about the Vietnam War. Actually, the one thing that was true about the Vietnam War was it became very unpopular. It was very unpopular in the United States. I remember all the protests and stuff. It was extremely unpopular. It split the country. It ripped the country in half. So it was pretty tough. What was the eventual outcome of the Vietnam War? The United States and South Vietnam signed a ceasefire agreement with North Vietnam. The United States and South Vietnam signed a ceasefire agreement with North Vietnam. And unfortunately, 2 years later, the North Vietnamese took over South Vietnam. Maybe not unfortunately. I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of hard to say now. Okay, 3 ways that Nixon tried to change our policy toward communist China was he permitted them to replace nationalist China in the United Nations. He visited China, and he began trade with China. Okay, so he traded with China, he visited China, and he allowed communist China, the People's Republic of China, to be in the United Nations. The SALT I Treaty. What did the SALT I Treaty do? It limited certain types of nuclear weapons. Usually the older ones. We got rid of the older ones and so did the Russians, but it limited certain types of nuclear weapons. In the Middle East, the United States supported Israel, and the very first person to step on the moon was none other than Neil Armstrong. So most of you guys should know that one. So that is your review. Sorry about the sneezing and sniffling. It's just been really pretty rough. It's pretty early in the morning, too. It's like 20 till 9, and so I just took my allergy pill for the day. So hopefully I won't suffocate from pollen. So you guys have a good day. Good luck tomorrow with the test. I'll post this on Facebook. Goodbye.